Hello, and you're welcome to Global Business Insights, where we look at headlines from a deeper business perspective. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's cabinet approved additional tax incentives for company fleets of electric cars only days after Volkswagen threatened to close factories in Germany for the first time. Volkswagen said it had lost sales of some 500,000 cars, which was the equivalent of around 2 plants, and needs to urgently increase productivity by cutting costs. In Germany, the Hamburg Commercial Bank Services PMI was down to 51.2 in August, slightly below market expectations and the previous month's reading. Meanwhile, the composite PMI in contraction territory slipped also further to 48.4, just under the expected read and the prior reading of 48.5. In the US, the job openings and labor turnover survey showed that the number of job openings in July decreased a little from the previous month, while separations rose. The July openings number fell to 7.673 million, far below the 8.1 million expected. The June number also was revised down from 8.184 million to 7.91 million jobs. Also in the US, factory orders, which measures change in the value of new purchased orders of manufactured goods at US factories, was up 5% higher than the 4.7% expected. In the UK, it was good news as UK services sector recovery gained momentum. The headline S&P Global UK Services PMI Index was up at 53.7 in August from 52.5 in July, also the highest reading since April. It was, however, noted that although showing a solid upturn in service sector output, the latest reading was still slightly below the long-run survey average. That was 54.4. Improved activity in the UK was due to an improving economic backdrop and an associated rise in willingness to spend, including the prospect of falling borrowing costs, supporting business and consumer sentiment. The latest data published by Caixin today showed China's Services Purchasing Managers Index down from 52.1 in July to 51.6 in August, also missing estimates of 52.2. The Japanese yen edged higher as Japan's service sector activity stayed in expansion in August, with Service Purchasing Managers Index unchanged at 53.7 last month. Service companies' new business growth slowed from the previous month. Japan's biggest steel maker, Nippon Steel, seeking to acquire US Steel, said today if its purchase goes ahead, core senior management as well as a majority of board members at the US company would still be US citizens. Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris came out against the Nippon takeover of US Steel at a campaign stop in Pittsburgh on Monday. Her views mirror those of President Joe Biden's and former President Donald Trump's, but Harris will propose a tax deduction of up to $50,000 for new small businesses today. That's a tenfold increase over existing relief and further evidence of her support for middle-class America. UK regulators are scaling back on a previous practice that would have forced banks and payment companies to reimburse fraud victims up to £415,000 after strong pressure from industry. The new maximum fraud payout is now expected to be set at just £85,000. And in Beijing, Nigeria and China have signed a comprehensive agreement to enhance collaboration in the Belt and Road Initiative, human resource development, and nuclear energy. There are more than a few challenges that Volkswagen faces as it spoke to 20,000 workers at the main factory in Wolfsburg to tell them that for the first time in Germany, plant closures and mass layoffs were imminent. It said demand for its cars hasn't recovered since the pandemic, with industry-wide auto deliveries in the region of around 2 million, short of its peak. Cars are made to last longer and less necessary to own as a new generation look to alternative mobility models. The costs of borrowing went through the roof in the last 3 years, and the squeezed purse locally and more importantly abroad implies few cars will be leaving the showroom. Competition, especially from the more affordable electric vehicle market, has also intensified. Volkswagen, with its capital muscle and technology edge, was able for some time to ride the waves, but it says not anymore. As the recent restructuring struggled to deliver expected savings, it now admits it simply has too much capacity and must shut down at least 2 plants and lay off thousands, which will also be expensive, and sets up for a showdown with powerful unions as the country's most important industry fights for its future. Employees backed by German Labour Minister Hubertus Heil are asking Volkswagen executives to keep plants open, avoid firings, and find sensible ways forward in negotiations with unions. Professor Adeola Adenikinju, President, Nigerian Economic Society, spoke of Nigeria's socio-economic challenges at its 65th annual conference in Abuja yesterday. He said the Nigerian economy has been in a weak state over many years, with tepid growth, low total factor productivity, weak currency, rising prices, and above all, a low quality of life. He called for the establishment of a presidential economic council with economists, strong economists, and said there should be no compromise to monetary authority independence. He also called for modernization of the agricultural sector and improved access to technology inputs and irrigation. On energy security, he called for bolder reform implemented in a phased model with proper communication to minimize pain and enhance the buy-in. The opposition on the U.S. Steel takeover from Harris, Biden, and Trump is more likely about getting the union vote. The United Steelworkers were opposed to the Nippon deal from the start, worried if Nippon will honor the basic labor agreement between the union and US Steel, despite assurance from the Japanese steelmaker that it will. Analysts say Pennsylvania's 19 electoral college votes could determine the 2024 presidential election. US Steel stock has been down about 22% year to date, mostly following disappointment about the deal. US Steel stock also dropped far below Nippon's proposed $55 a share bid for the company because the politics made the deal unlikely. A better candidate like Nippon could not have emerged. Japan is an ally. Nippon is far larger, better capitalized steel maker with leading technology. Nippon also promised an extra $2.7 billion in local investments to try to sway politicians and the Steelworkers Union. Still on politics, after the policy to attack price gouging that came up, we've seen maybe better proposals coming from the Democrats in wanting to help small businesses. This time, a tax deduction of up to $50,000 for new small businesses. Kamala Harris will also announce a goal of 25 million small business applications during her first term, exceeding the 19 million new small business applications under Biden. Trump economic advisors previously argued that Harris's proposal would boost inflation and damage the economy. A closely watched and critical debate on the 10th of September is expected to focus in part on the economy. I would advise Nippon to pause and perhaps try again next year when politics will be abating somewhat, and politicians will be reviewing the campaign decisions for which will fly and which maybe should be reviewed simply because they don't make sense. That is after the votes are in the bag. In the UK, scammers may now expect weaker efforts by banks and payment companies to protect them from frauds as the new regime proposes a much lower reimbursement for victims. Treasury insiders had called the planned new regime, which comes into effect early October, a disaster waiting to happen, but consumer advocates insisted it would still offer vital protection for scam victims. after a consultation on the new limit. An announcement is set to be made soon. In 2023, Britons lost £459.7 million to authorized push payment (APP) fraud, where someone is tricked into sending money from their bank account to a fraudster. Banks and payments companies currently reimburse on a voluntary basis customers for fraud at widely varying rates, with some refunding almost 100% of cases and others less than 10%. The industry also argued that the 415,000 compensation limit was far too high and could encourage fraudsters to set up fake online deals with an accomplice, claiming maximum compensation from the payment provider and sharing the proceeds. Others say the slashing of the reimbursement limit risks exposing victims of the highest value scams to devastating financial and emotional harm, and may reduce crucial financial incentives for payments firms to put in place effective fraud security measures, making it more likely that scammers will continue to thrive on some payment platforms. The payment system regulator observes that there was a wide divergence between UK banks in the actual amount of payments fraud they were refunding to consumers. Others fear that a reduced per claim cap would still leave financial services firms exposed to unlimited liabilities for multiple frauds. Still, taking the cap from £415,000 to £85,000 could have been staged to better monitor the effect on incidents of payment fraud. Nigeria has been looking at having its own nuclear energy industry for more than a decade or so, and during the visit of President Tinubu to China, it was reported that he has secured a commitment from the tech giant Huawei to establish a joint solar PV test lab in Nigeria, and another company pledging to build an assembly plant for electric tricycles and train Nigerians in technology and renewable energy development. But of greater interest is part of the agreements focused on helping to fast track a nuclear industry in Nigeria. This agreement comes as China plans to embark on a record-breaking nuclear expansion that will see it build more nuclear power plants than any other country in the world, in what will make it the world's biggest nuclear generator by 2030. For Nigeria, the partnership offers a promising avenue for advancing its own energy infrastructure and sustainable development goals. The devil tends to be in the details and in what actually gets executed, but China looks set to become a much more influential partner in the Nigeria economic development narrative, and indeed in Africa, at a time when the West is warning of predatory investments that do not help poorer countries, slamming huge tariffs to protect against dumping, and implications of aligning with a country which seems to be more anti-US than ever before in its priorities and friends. European stocks closed sharply lower, tracking losses on Wall Street yesterday and in Asian Pacific markets. For US stocks, the markets are coming back after yesterday's losses, which was fueled by worries about economic growth and the artificial intelligence trade amid a slide in Nvidia shares. Yesterday, the US Justice Department subpoenaed Nvidia for possible violations of antitrust laws, triggering a sell-off in the broader tech space that spilled over into the Asian and European session. US stocks, though rebounding, are still on edge, buckling up for some September turbulence ahead of the monthly jobs report due this Friday. Well, that's it from me on Global Business Insights. This is Bode Oshosami. Thanks for sharing and following or subscribing on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube and X. Thank you so very much for watching. Bye-bye.